Hello, everyone, and welcome to APB's Ideacast. Today we have with us Rebecca Costa. Rebecca will start off with a 10-minute talk, and then we will end with some questions and answers. So attendees, make sure to write out your questions in the bottom bar by pressing Q&A. Award-winning scientist and futurist, Rebecca Costa is the global expert on fast adaptation in high failure rate environments. She will discuss the key strategies that allow some organizations to thrive in the face of crisis, as well as behaviors that send others into destruction. We will learn about one of the 12 principles of successful adaptation using real-world examples and discover the steps businesses, nonprofits, individuals, and nations must take to ensure a lasting recovery. Let's welcome Rebecca Costa.
Hello, welcome to the Ideacast, and thank you APB for hosting these Ideacasts. I think this is a very difficult time for a lot of businesses, and particularly executives and leaders who have been, working in the same industry for many decades. And the question that I get asked the most is, what separates those companies and those organizations, even nonprofits, that wind up thriving in a situation of unprecedented change? And what separates them from those that succumb and don't do well at all? And even a third category, which are those that survive. And the real answer is adaptability. Adaptability is the most important characteristic an organization can have when we encounter sudden changes in the environment. And there are 12 very clear principles of adaptability, but today, since in the interest of time, I'm only going to talk about one, and that is diversification. Most of us are familiar with highly complex, high failure rate environments. We may not describe them in that exact way, but we know how to respond to high failure rate environments when we go to invest in our portfolios. We certainly don't take all our money and bet on one stock because we feel that that's too dangerous and risky of a bet. So instead, what we do is that we spread that investment all around. We invest in some high-tech stocks, in some dividend earning stocks, some utilities. We spread it all around. We buy some bonds, we buy some ETFs, and we spread it all around. And why are we doing that? We're doing that because when the stock market goes down, we're hoping that the bond market will go up. And so we're willing to accommodate failure. And that's what diversification does. It spreads our bets out across a wide range so that we can accommodate a certain amount of failure without our organization failing. So those companies who are the most diversified are doing the best and doing well and actually benefiting from this sudden change in the environment right now. And those would be companies like Abbott Labs. Abbott Labs is highly diversified. Not only do they have a diagnostics division, they also are the makers of Pediasure, Ensure, and other nutritional, products as well. And they also have a pharmaceutical group. So they're very, very diversified. Amazon is another very diversified company. Unilever. When we look at these companies, we can see that they're very diversified so that if the demand for one product tends to go down, the other products that they offer tend to go up. And so it's effectively a wash unless that demand surges, as it has in many cases, like for 3M PPE equipment as well. So diversification is really key to adaptability. That would be one thing. Diversification in terms of your supply chain, as an example. There hasn't been much discussion about supply chain management during this COVID crisis, but that's also a place where you could look at diversification. If you had no inventory and you were dependent on one methodology, let's say it's just-in-time inventory. Just-in-time inventory, for those of you not familiar with that, is very simple. It's when you buy a can of tomato soup at Walmart and they scan it, that information goes to the maker of that soup and they say, we want you to replace that can by tomorrow morning. And so, where you used to have big warehouses in the back of superstores, you don't have that anymore because they're delivering on time every day, right? Every day you're just replacing what was sold. That's the ideal situation because you're not tying up your cash in inventory or warehousing, your real estate to warehouse those things. But think about it, just-in-time inventory doesn't really work when there's a peak load demand. It wasn't designed to do that. So suddenly when everybody needs ventilators and everyone needs PPE, unfortunately those kinds of products were treated like cans of soup. Because economically, it's better to have your money working for you than tied up in inventory. And one of the lessons we've learned out of this COVID disaster is the fact that you don't want to treat cans of soup the same way you do ventilators. Some things you just have to bite the bullet, the economic bullet, and you've got to inventory them. But more importantly, you don't want to be dependent on one supplier. So for those people who cut a really, really good deal and had a supplier way over in India or China, and they were dependent on one supplier at the cheapest possible cost, when that supplier could no longer deliver, it left them scrambling. So again, diversification. You want diversification of product and services. You want diversification in your supply line, in your supply chain. You also want diversification in how you treat innovation inside your company. All innovation is not equal. Some innovation is extremely high risk and it's going to take a long time, such as the development of vaccines as an example. Other innovation is market driven and it needs to be on a fast track. What allowed Abbott Labs to be able to get a 5-minute testing unit out was the fact that they had multiple tracks inside the company. They had fast tracks for those things where there was an immediate market demand and they could move quickly. They had also designed the testing system to be adaptable so that other kinds of tests could be done on the same machine. So they didn't really have to redesign the machine. They just had to make it compatible with testing for COVID-19. So what's important there is that they had a method for being able to accelerate and skip certain steps in order to get a product to market faster. So we call the other type of development moonshots. Moonshots, you don't really know what you're doing. You don't really know what you're getting involved in. And those are development projects that take a long time and they have a lot of failures along the way. And you have to be able to accommodate the failures and a long-term investment. So one of the things that you want to be able to do is have diversified processes where you have clear-cut identification of which innovation should be in which track. If you're only using one approval process for the development of new products or services, it's already a problem because that means that things that could go fast will go too slow and things that go slow are going to be rushed to market and you'll have problems that you deal with on the back end. So we now know internal processes need to be diversified. Supply chain providers need to be diversified and supply chain management needs to be diversified. That's a methodology as well. And you also want to have a diversified products and services. You also want to cater to diversified markets. If you're only going after one market, maybe you want to think about your product being adaptable to other markets. The beer industry just learned this over COVID-19. They learned that they had all the equipment to be able to make hand sanitizer. So when the market for beer went away, they switched gears and said, what do we have and what could we make? And they began making hand sanitizer, which turned out to be a lot easier than making beer that everyone likes. So in that way, you want to be able to set yourself up to be diversified in all aspects, internal systems, supply chain providers, supply chain management systems, in terms of the products and services that you offer. You want to be diversified as much as possible. Now, I've just talked about one aspect that allows some companies to prevail when a sudden change occurs. Some companies will not be able to make the change, and they will become what us sociobiologists call extinct. And others will survive. They will hang on for a very, very long time. We don't know which companies are in the last two categories, but we do know that the companies that are most diversified have the greatest chance of thriving in the current pandemic. Now, I'm going to stop here for just a moment and take questions, because I know there's a lot of questions out there at this particular time. And so I'm going to stop and allow the great people of APB to feed me some questions that are coming from some of the viewers today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for helping us understand how to thrive in this crisis. Now let's get into the questions. Attendees, make sure to write out your questions in the bottom bar by pressing Q&A. Marge from California asked, where do you think the future of conferences and events are heading after COVID-19?
Well, in order to answer that, I have to backtrack a little bit, and I have to say that I am not a big believer we're going to have a vaccine anytime soon, and I'm going to use history to back up my argument here. In 1984, just about the time AIDS was breaking out everywhere, and we thought we may have a pandemic on our hands, the head of Health and Human Services of the United States came out and said, we're going to put all hands on deck. And by the way, we're going to have a vaccine in 12 to 24 months. That was 36 years ago. We don't have a really good track record with vaccines. As a matter of fact, vaccines have only successfully eliminated only one disease that threatens humans off the face of the earth. That disease is smallpox. All other diseases that we're aware of are hiding out somewhere and ready to explode. So we're not very good at preventing you from getting something. What we are good at is you don't have to die of AIDS anymore. We're very good at finding things that will mitigate the symptoms and that you don't have to die from the disease anymore. And so from that perspective, I am very, very optimistic. So I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer. I'm very optimistic about the treatments that I see, the convalescent plasma treatments and other treatments that are under development. It is far more likely that within the next 6 months, if you start feeling kind of crummy, you go to your doctor writes you a prescription, you go down to the local drugstore, they give you something to take, you take it, and after a couple of days you feel good and you go back to work. As long as you're not going to die from it or have severe after consequences on it, do you really care if you're vaccinated? We're not going to be able to prevent you from getting COVID, but we will be able to prevent you from dying or becoming seriously ill or having any long-term effects. That's more likely. So now let me answer your question. When that happens, when COVID is just as bad as a flu and you can get something from your doctor to take care of it, I believe conferences as we know it will resume. However, I will add one little stipulation. We've now learned that virtual conferences work. We've gotten to have a global laboratory, and nobody has tested this more than the American Program Bureau. So we know that works. So this again offers diversification. The subject today was diversification. I believe that organizations like the American Program Bureau will begin to offer new products that you might not have thought of before, and that might be more cost effective and might be just as impactful. So I think new products are going to come out of the speaking industry, and that's what I see.
John from Minnesota asked, how can we incorporate fast adaptation when, with this pandemic, it feels like the world is slowing down completely?
Well, the world has slowed down. It kind of came to a stop. We kind of froze business and we froze finance. We kind of all came, we had to take a pause. So we did slow down. And so your description is absolutely correct. How will we adapt? We're a very adaptable organism of all of the billions of creatures on the earth, the most adaptable organism is the human organism. It's what allowed us to climb to the very top of the living pyramid. Think of it. Of all the living, all life forms on earth, humans have adapted so well that we have now become masters of the universe. And not just our own environment, we're able to go out into other environments where there's no oxygen, into outer space and down to the depths of the ocean. So there's no question we're going to adapt. What I believe will happen is a whole series of innovations will develop. This is sort of a forced renaissance, so to speak. Yeah, a lot of new products and new ways of working and new ways of thinking are going to develop. We won't abandon the old ways. As I was saying earlier, conferences will come back. We'll still have barbecues in our backyard and birthday parties. Those things will come back because after all, it is human nature to be a troop-dwelling organism. This is our evolutionary history, right? We want to be with other people. Even introverts want to be with other people, and they score higher on all happiness tests when they spend more time with other people, even though they'll deny it. So I do believe that we will go back to what is in our nature, what is basically human nature, which is to be with other people, to learn from each other, to help each other. This is part of human nature, and we will return to that. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but it's coming.
Alex from Iowa asked, when you speak to corporations, what main issues are they facing? And do you think those issues are the same today as before the pandemic, or did COVID-19 ignite further disruption?
I think COVID-19 had a way of bringing to light the vulnerability and wherever your weaknesses were. And I think that the number one question that I get asked, but again, I'm the global expert on fast adaptation. So I consult with the largest global corporations in the world, as well as smaller startups that are just trying to, survive this so that they can get back out there and build up a company. The number one question I ask is, how do I adapt? What do I put in place that allows me to adapt quickly and successfully? And there are things you can do that don't cost a lot of money, including developing a culture that is not fear adverse. It's very important that when you have a sudden change like this, that you're suddenly in no man's land. It's uncharted, and you really need brave soldiers. You really do. And if you have a culture that is, imbued by fear, people are afraid to make a mistake because they're going to lose their jobs or some such. It's very hard for them to suddenly overnight become courageous and fearless and ready to try things that have never been tried before. So, and let me add to that one other thing. That I think is important. It's a little bit tangential, but I think it's important for listeners today to know. In a time where you have an emergency and you need people to, kick into fast action mode, the last thing you want around you are optimizers and maximizers. They will kill an organization under conditions like this. So if you got a maximizer and optimizer who's looking for the perfect solution, get them out of the room as quickly as possible, because that's not what you need. What you need are people who are courageous and not afraid to fail.
Fran from New York asked, how can organizations bring a feeling of corporate culture back when layoffs are happening and everyone is working from home?
Well, it's hard, to say that suddenly working from home is the same as working in the office. We all miss that. We miss that probably more than we thought we were going to. The first week you get to work at home, it feels like a vacation. You could work in your PJs. You're getting probably more work done because you're not being interrupted as much. And then, the second week you're on Zoom and Skype and you're kind of missing your coworkers. there are a lot of tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams and things that will help you. I think these kinds of group conversations are very important, where you have lots of people able to talk at the same time. It's a little bit awkward. You have to figure out how to read the person and know when you're not interrupting, and it can get a little weird at the beginning. But I think that those kinds of tools are very, very important. I think it's also important to think about games, playing games as teams. So, if you're going to get on a format like this, get 2 or 3 people that are on one team and 2 or 3 people that are another team, and then challenge each other to trivia questions or just word Scrabble games, those kinds of things. I think those kinds of things tend to bring us, we like competition. We like solving problems in short order. Those are things that are built into the human DNA. Remember that in the face of an emergency, we are genetically designed to come together because as a group, we can better fight off a threat that's larger than any particular individual. So this is why those movies where a meteor is going to hit the earth, or aliens attack us, or whatever, are so popular, where suddenly nations that hated each other all of a sudden have to come together to save the planet. We love those kinds of movies because they tie right into our DNA. And you see that happening now. Neighbors that didn't really talk to each other are sharing food and helping each other out, doing grocery shopping for each other. You see that happening. So I think that, it's hard to keep a corporate culture going, but there are tools. There are definitely technology tools that can help. Another thing is get more personal. Get more personal. You might not ask questions of your coworkers at the office about, hey, how are you feeling? You seem a little down. Those might not be the kind of questions you would ask in a work environment, but it's totally appropriate to ask them now.
Now let's go to the live questions, and these will be our last 2 questions. Marsha from Wisconsin asked, we have all been adapting to this current state, but what should businesses, both big and small, be prepared for when the new normal eventually arrives?
Well, again, the new normal isn't going to mean abandoning what you did before. We never abandoned what we did before. I mean, everybody was really sure that when, video came out, that movie theaters would all go bankrupt and shut down. Guess what? We still go to the movies. We don't have to go to the movies. We can get the movie on satellite, on Netflix, on our phones, on our computers, on our TVs. What is the point of going to a movie theater and sitting down and eating popcorn with a bunch of strangers to see a movie on a bigger screen? I mean, so we always think we're going to abandon what we did before, and that's not usually what happens. What usually happens is the market cuts up into smaller spaces. So I would say to you, we won't completely abandon what we did before. Some things will die a natural death to make room for new things. I think the most important thing is when you're trying out new things is to understand that you have to have an accommodation for failure. In a high failure rate environment, if you don't accommodate failure, nobody will do anything. People, human beings are risk adverse. Risk meant we became food for a predator. So we are naturally risk adverse. And negative experiences stay with us. And this is scientifically proven. Negative experiences stay with us much longer than positive experiences. So you promote a person, that sticks around for, maybe a few hours. They feel good about it. You tell them they're doing a bad job, that sticks around for months and years. So bear in mind that we're not symmetrical in terms of our response. So I think the main thing that I would say is understand that you're going to make some mistakes. There's going to be some 2 steps forward, 1 step back as you try out new services, new products, new methods, and bring forward the things you've learned out of this crisis. There's going to be, a little bit of funkiness in there. It's going to be a bumpy road, but be patient and continue.
Our last question is from Brittany. How can organizations stay positive for the future using the lessons we've now learned?
Well, as you can tell, I'm I'm an expert at fast adaptation in high failure rate environments, and I'm a pretty optimistic person. And the reason I am is because never have we had more science and more technology than humankind has available today. So we are going to have a treatment, and I believe we'll have a treatment that is very reasonable and will keep you from dying and will make you feel better in very short order. I think we're going to have that in 6 months to, maybe 8 months. That's not a really long time. During that period of time, there's going to be a little awkwardness. Some of us are going to be working from home, some in the office. Sometimes we'll be in the office, not be in the office. But I think the way to look at it is we had this crisis, we learned a lot from it, and now on a go forward basis, we're going to change some things and some things we're not going to. And it's a process. It's a process now of vetting out those things that were effective and those that were not. And more importantly, to turn our organizations into organizations that are more adaptable. Because while this pandemic is a very serious matter, it's not really largely different from the subprime mortgage catastrophe. It isn't largely different from 9/11. These kinds of crises, they happen. And when they happen, if you are diversified, as we said earlier, or if you are adaptable, if you follow the 12 principles of adaptation in my book On the Verge, you've got a leg up over everybody else. So I guess if you know what those principles are and you're already putting them into play in your organization, you have reason to be optimistic, because not only will you survive when these crises occur, you will thrive.
Well, that's all the time that we have today. Rebecca, thank you so much for this IdeaCast, and attendees, thank you for being a part of it.
Well, thank you so much for having these IdeaCasts, and I hope we have more.
If you want Rebecca to be a part of your next event, either live or virtually, APB is remote and ready to inform, inspire, and bring people together. You can email apb@apbspeakers.com. Again, that's apb@apbspeakers.com for more information on booking Rebecca Costa. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again.